Behind me is a Radical SR3, one of the newest additions to the ApexV2R fleet of race cars. I'm with Jeff, the crew chief, to talk a little bit about it. So Jeff, what is this machine behind me?
So this is a Radical, and if you're not familiar with this kind of chassis, it's made in Europe, it's made in England, and it's a spec chassis essentially, but it's a spec race car is maybe a better way of terming it, because it is definitely a race car. As you can see, we kind of have it blown apart right now, and because it's a race car, you do have to stay up on maintenance. So we've got Paul doing a nut and bolt check on it right now. There's no rubber in this thing. Like a regular car that's going to be on the street has got rubber mounting or rubber bushings for suspension and engine and transmission and all that. Not so with this thing. It's all hard mount. It's all heim joints for the suspension. And with that, you get a lot of vibration in the car, which is hard on fasteners that are going to back off over time. So you do have to basically do a nut and bolt check on it every so often and make sure all that stuff is still tight. So we're coming into the season with this car, doing maintenance. We're going to be changing brakes and just going through it. And as we're looking around, there's no motor in this car right now. The motor was out to get rebuilt. So it's sitting on the bench and we're going to be getting it back in. But as apart as it looks right now, it's really probably half a day away from being, in running condition again. It's powered by a Suzuki Hayabusa engine. It uses the Suzuki transmission, the one that's in the motor that you have on a motorcycle, and it goes to a transaxle from there. So that's how it turns from a from a single wheel drive to a two-wheel drive, rear wheel drive only on this car. Fully tube chassis, fiberglass body. In Europe, coincidentally, this car is street legal. You can put it on the street, so that's pretty amazing. Yep, you can get these things on the street. But here, obviously not street legal. It's an extremely popular car for amateur racing and even professional racing. It's a spec series, so all the SR3s, SR1s and 2s, they're all coming off a jig. They're all the same. You can do very limited adjustments to the car itself. I mean, you're limited to suspension and wing adjustments. Everything beyond that, you cannot get into the motor. They're sealed. So I can show you what the seal looks like on the engine that's just been rebuilt. So it has to go back to Radical Canada in our case. The engine gets brought back to a spec that is from the factory, and everybody is racing the same engine. You can't change cams, you can't change compression ratio. So it's a very, again, spec series, so everybody's racing the same shopping cart.
Have you driven one yourself?
Limitedly. Okay. Because I don't want to own it. Yeah. If I crash it. Yeah. But a lot of fun. A paddle shifter. So again, it's the 6-speed sequential transmission that is from Suzuki through the engine, but it's done with a paddle shifter on the steering wheel. So it's air shifted. So there's a little air compressor on there. So when you hit the paddles, it's basically got an automated foot in there that's shifting up and shifting down on the transmission in the bike, or the bike transmission that's in the engine. So it's a lot of fun that way. The type of thing, you use the clutch to get it going, and after that you're blipping throttles. You don't really need the clutch after that. So and actually this one of the modifications that we did to this engine going back in is we put a recluse clutch in it. So it's if you're familiar with recluse clutches in the motorcycle world, you can actually at idle put it in gear without pushing the clutch pedal, rev it up a little bit, and it'll simply start moving ahead like a centrifugal clutch. No,
it looks like a ton of fun. Like, I can't wait to drive it. I don't know if I could even get to the point of actually making use of the aerodynamics of it. Because I heard some stories like you really have to go farther than you think you can even.
Yeah, so it's one of those things. You have to go fast enough to get the aero working for you, and if you don't, the car feels a little bit numb. Again, I have driven it, not to its potential, because I didn't want to push it that hard, but it's a lot of fun. It's surprising. Manual steering on it too. There is a steering rack, so it's rack and pinion steering, but there's no power assist, and it's surprising how much resistance is in the steering wheel when you start to load the car going into the corner. All right, so here's the engine from the Radical, and this is the motor that we got, that Apex got when they purchased the car, but we have sent it out for a rebuild, and it's rebuilt to Radical specs. So it has to go back to an authorized dealer for Radical, in our case, Radical Canada. They go through the whole motor, replace what needs to be replaced. But the most important thing, if you're gonna race this in a Radical series, it has to be a sealed motor. And that doesn't refer to seals like holding the engine oil into the cases or anything like that. The seal is this little piece of metal right here that's hard to see. It's in behind the wrapping, but that piece of metal, it's all twisted up in the safety wire, which goes through a bolt here, runs down, rolls through a bolt in the case, which goes down, which goes through another bolt here in the bottom end. What that does, again, that's sealed by Radical Canada, so that if you were to open it up, if you needed to open it up for some reason, you have to cut that safety wire, which makes this engine illegal to run in any kind of accredited series. It has to be a sealed motor to run, and that seal has to be intact. All right, so like I was saying earlier, this is a motorcycle engine. So normally in a motorcycle, there would be a sprocket here driving the rear end or the rear tire, but in our case, there's a coupler here that goes to the transaxle, but the engine and transmission are exactly the same as they would be at a motorcycle, and the 6-speed transmission is feeding all 6 speeds to the transaxle, just like it would in a motorcycle. This would be, you know, your foot-activated clutch lever, or sorry, your foot-activated gear selector, which is on an air cylinder for upshifts and downshifts. So again, it's a very compact little engine transmission combination, and even though it's small, this thing's got a lot of power.